Hi, I'm Steve Ceresi from the University of Massachusetts Amherst,
And I'm April Zaniski, also from UMass Amherst.
and we're super psyched to make it to the final round for the Best Research Award for e-assessment. I know we don't have a lot of time, so let me move to, what am I moving to, April? The overview of the mapped.
You're going to talk about the overview of the map, and you have 8 minutes, so get a move on.
Okay, Taskmaster. So, one of the ways we think about the mapped is, so it's the Massachusetts Adult Proficiency Test, and we call it the greatest little test no one's ever heard of, because there's some really cool features about it, but because it's limited to adult education in Massachusetts, the word is not yet out on it. We're hoping with this award and promoting some of the research behind it, that will change. It's developed at UMass. It's online 24/7. It's currently operational in both reading and mathematics, and it fulfills the federal accountability requirements for adult education. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. It uses multi-stage adaptive testing technology. Here you see the map design. And what's a little bit different for our MST design compared to most MSTs is we have 5 different starting points because adult education students can be all over the map. The teacher decides where they start, and then they can get routed across 6 stages. The purposes of the map is to measure adult learners' knowledge and skills in math and reading so that the progress in meeting educational goals can be evaluated. And this idea of measuring their progress, measuring their gains, is part of what is required in the federal legislation. Adult education students have to be pre and post tested, so measuring their progress over the course of instruction is important. And the student scores are aggregated to evaluate the programs within the state, and then the state gets evaluated by the U.S. Department of Education. So how do we demonstrate that the MAP is appropriate for fulfilling those purposes? Well, that brings us into the realm of validity, right? So validity is often described as the most important thing in educational testing. And we believe there's not a lot of good examples of validation practices. So what we've proposed for this award is our body of research that we've done to validate the map and support its use for the purposes I just described. So
All
we
right,
think
let's
that
get a
our,
move on here, Professor.
what's that?
Get a move on here, Professor. You've
All right,
got
get a
about
move on.
7 minutes.
All right. So I won't give a whole class on validity, but validity is the degree to which evidence and theory support the use of a test for a particular purpose. So that evidence comes in the form of research. The standards for educational and psychological testing talk about 5 different sources of validity evidence, and that has to be considered in trying to come up with a research agenda. So our validity research framework for the MAP has been using these 5 sources of validity evidence and then crossing it with the intended testing purposes. So coming up with questions that would relate to those purposes. Are we measuring the right skills? Is it congruent with the curriculum frameworks? And also looking at potential negative consequences. Tests are supposed to have good consequences like positive effect on instruction. But we also, in thinking about validation, there might be some sources of bias or invalidity that we'd have to also include in that agenda. So that's our validity framework. And all of our research is described in the technical manual that we submitted in support of this Best Research Award. So let's go through the 5 sources. So in the technical manual, and how many pages is it, April? Like more than
350.
200,
350.
350 pages. So we talk about the external groups of subject matter experts we've brought in to evaluate the mapped items, and we give them systematic rating tests so we can quantify the degree to which the items in different content areas and cognitive areas are aligned with the intended constructs that we're trying to measure. So there's lots of content validity evidence. With respect to response process validity evidence, we do things like looking at the log data for the amount of time it takes students to respond to items across different cognitive levels. So items that are measuring lower cognitive levels are hypothesized to be answered more quickly than items measuring higher cognitive levels. And here you see it across content areas also. Then with respect to internal structure, now this type of validity evidence is more common because we have the data just from administering the exam. And item response theory underlies the map test development, item calibration, scoring, and so forth. So we look at the degree to which the items fit the IRT models, as well as how well students' responses to all the items on the assessment fit the predictions from the model. So we do a lot of item and test fit. Here you see the residual analysis examples. And then with respect to the category of validity evidence based on relations to other variables, we've also been able to get some data on other assessments that some adults have taken in reading and math and looked at those correlations. And we get the positive relationships we'd expect. Again, these studies are described in the technical manual. With respect to validity evidence based on relations to other variables, because the primary purpose is measuring students' gain, we want to make sure the map is sensitive to students making gains. So we designed this simulation study where we simulated different levels of gain, and you see that in the columns going across the top here, and then observed when we routed simulees through the maps, we observed what their gains were, and they were pretty close to what was simulated. So that was some evidence that we actually that the map is sensitive to measuring actual gains, even when the standard errors of those gains are taken into consideration. With respect to testing consequences, there's a lot that we've done to build professional development opportunities around the map, things like how to understand score reports, and there's a lot more reference in the manual there, involving teachers and educators in item writing workshops, standard setting studies, and so forth. And also, with respect to validity evidence based on tested consequences, are surveys of teachers within the adult education community in Massachusetts, how the map is influencing their teaching, whether they're using score reports, and things like that. So when we think about the 5 sources of evidence, remember our framework and what studies we've actually done. Now these check marks represent the work we've done in each category. And we feel pretty good. We've got evidence in each of the categories, and we've answered almost all the questions. We haven't done enough yet to look at whether the test might be used inappropriately for placements, and that's something that continues to be on our research agenda. That said, we're happy with the amount of work that has been done. Validity is an ongoing process for sure, but that's what we submitted in terms of the work we've done for the award. And go ahead.
That's a lot of stuff there, Steve, but I think we should get to the questions from the panel.
Right. That's what we have up here. So thank you. And thank you for all your work on helping with this research. So first question, what evidence exists to support the claim that the mapped research continues to inspire innovations in test development and validation? Well, I think the fact that April Zaniski is still working here is probably the best. No, but seriously, let me answer that question by first starting our mapped multi-stage adaptive design. We're proud of what the map does, but it's in thinking about what more we need to do that inspired us to submit a grant to the U.S. Department of Education that just got funded called the ASAP, the Adult Skills Assessment Program. And we're taking the idea of adapting based on item difficulty and extending that to adapt from a test to a testing system. So the map has inspired this new design for adult skills assessment in both numeracy and literacy, in that a test doesn't exist until an examinee shows up with a specific testing purpose in mind, and we gather some personal characteristics about the examinee that feed into an assessment compiler that taps not an item bank, but a warehouse of assessment test modules that are designed to produce the best test that it can, given the constraints that exist within the warehouse and the personalization options and the testing purpose. So it's just one example of how the map has inspired innovation in thinking beyond a particular test to a testing system. And we're happy to talk more about that. I think the map has also been inspirational in thinking about other ways we can visualize what's actually happening in a multi-stage adaptive test. April, let me ask you to describe this slide.
Sure. This is a really cool way of showing what happens under the hood in a multi-stage test. As Steve mentioned earlier, the map has 5 starting places, and it's also unique because it has 6 stages. So what happens is on the left side of your screen, what you're seeing is, examinees are starting, and the test is trying to figure out where their skills are. And as they proceed through the 6 stages, we see that it starts to even out, and they end up right where they're supposed to be. This is a real innovation in terms of visualization for a multi-stage test to see how that actual adaptation plays out in practice. And this is for thousands of examinees.
So we're looking at thousands of examinees being rooted here. And this particular visualization won an award from the National Council on Measurement and Education.
Absolutely.
How else does the map continue to inspire? I think it's really one reason why we are successful in recruiting doctoral students to our program, as well as postdoctoral researchers, because they know they can work on an operational testing program. All right, let me move to the next question. The next question from the panel is, can you tell us something you learned about this test format that you would want to pass along to others who are considering developing a test of this type? Our first answer to this question is because it's digital, not everyone is familiar with the digital environment. So piloting the interface and the test design and getting feedback about that improves the final delivery and how you refine the interface has been super helpful. So the question, will all test takers understand how to successfully navigate it, is super important, and engaging with the field on that has been super helpful. The other thing is including stakeholders in test development. Now this is not so much specific to the digital nature of the exam, but we have found because we use teachers from the field and administrators from the field in developing items, reviewing items, standard setting, alignment, and so forth, and actually co-designing with students even, when they take the test and when they use the test results, they feel like it's their test. It's like this test that's imposed down on them. So that's some other advice we'd give. And the other thing we've learned is that multi-stage adaptive testing actually does lead to shorter tests. So we're taking advantage of the benefits of adaptive technology. In fact, as we were doing the research on the map, we realized our 40-item test, if we trimmed it down to 35 items, we could still represent the content in a significant way and maintain the level of measurement precision we were shooting for, get the same amount of test information. So that's some research that I think we'd like to pass along, that you can actually leverage the adaptive nature of an assessment to make sure that you're getting the most efficient assessment in real time. Okay, third question from the panel. What learnings do you think will be important for the ASAP, or alternatively, what do you think might be different for this population and testing goal? So based on what we've learned, I think this relates back to what we talked about, the adult skills assessment program. So we're trying to extend, what we've learned from the MAPT into an assessment system that is not just about accountability, or not primarily driven about accountability, but has a theory of action that focuses on the learner. And if they're going to interact with our system, there should be actionable information that's provided. So they interact with our system, provides information that goes to them and the other interested stakeholder, the employer or the learner, that leads to some action, which might be more testing or some promotion, certification perhaps, getting hired, additional training or education. And it's a kind of a cyclical process there. But the other thing I want to emphasize is that we're building the system using personalized, culturally responsive assessment practices. So there's no more test form that everybody takes, but rather configuring the best test for each person that allows them to use their funds of knowledge in responding to the content. So hopefully we're within time, but I do want to take a little bit of time just to thank the Assessment Award Committee. It's a thrill to be here, and hopefully we will see you all in June. April?
Thanks for your time.